there is travel that leaves you feeling powerful, in control of your own destiny. There are places in this world that, once traveled to, provoke within you an innate sense of your own strength and purpose. Alaska is not one of those places. This is a land where imposing snow-capped mountains dwarf everything in sight, where verdant forests of hemlock and spruce paint vast swaths of earth in emerald. Here, unyielding glaciers carve out the landscape, and abundant wildlife inhabits nearly every inch of land and sea. Alaska is simultaneously serene and invigorating, tranquil and aggressive. There are few travel experiences on this planet that can compare. This is the Great Alaskan Cruise. Our flight to Seattle was the beginning of a week-long voyage that will go down in memory as one of the greatest travel experiences of my life. After spending a day exploring some of the most famous sites in Seattle, along with our friends Ben and Emily, we boarded the Norwegian Bliss for a 7-night cruise along Alaska's southeast coast. From Seattle, we made our way to Juneau, Alaska's capital, where we rode bikes past mountains and got up close and personal with Alaska's most accessible glacier, the Mendenhall Glacier. From Juneau, we made our way to Skagway, where we enjoyed a journey on the White Pass Railway before embarking on a 7-mile mountain hike. We then spent an entire day cruising Glacier Bay National Park, which offers some of the most spectacular glacier viewing in the world. Our last 2 stops included a day in Ketchikan, a port with a small-town charm and lots of native history, where we explored via sea kayak, and finally we spent a small amount of time in Victoria, British Columbia. Just enough time to grab a drink before making our way back to Seattle, which is where we find ourselves tonight, at the beginning of our journey. I always suggest flying in at least one day before your cruise departs. Luckily, most cruise port towns are great places to visit, Seattle being one of the best. With only 36 hours in Seattle, we knew that we had to make the most of every minute. Everyone I know that has visited Seattle says the same thing. They wish they had more time to explore Seattle. We knew that we wanted to visit the world-famous Pike Place Market. We had to make it to the Space Needle. We wanted to do this haunted underground tour through the city's expansive tunnel system. You know, the touristy things people do when in Seattle. We had a jam-packed itinerary for our one full day, so we had to hit the ground running, which meant coffee, and lots of it. Luckily, Seattle is a town that knows how to make a good cup of joe. Yes. We all know about our green Java overlord, and we'll get there. But there are some other wonderful places to grab some delicious coffee in Seattle. One of them has been a staple here since 2002, and by some miracle provided by the caffeine gods, it was mere steps from our apartment. Now that we were properly caffeinated and sugared up, we set off for the first stop on our whirlwind tour of the Emerald City, the Starbucks Reserve Roastery. Located just 9 blocks from the original Starbucks in Pike Place, the Starbucks Reserve Roastery in the Capitol Hill neighborhood opened in 2014. Immediately upon entering, all of your senses come to life. While your eyes drink in the visually striking design of the space, the smell of freshly brewed coffee washes over you in a wave of warm, olfactory delight. In the gift shop, you'll find a curated collection of coffee curiosities. Sorry, I love alliteration. Stroll around and you'll find the beautiful, classically designed princey ovens, baking delicious artisanal breads and pastries. Truly a delight for the eyes, the nostrils, and the taste buds. A clackerboard overhead previews information about what's being roasted that day and which drinks you can find at one of the many coffee bars scattered throughout. The Starbucks Roastery essentially elevates coffee to a high art form, and watching the baristas here make coffee is just as much a performance as it is a tasting experience. Now that we were properly double caffeinated, we bade a fond farewell to the Starbucks Roastery, ran a few laps around the block, and then headed for our next mark, the world-famous Pike Place Market. Of all the major sites in Seattle on our list, this is the one I was most excited to visit. The Pike Place Market dates from 1907, and it's one of the largest and oldest markets in the US. Hundreds of farmers, artisans, chefs, craftspeople, and small businesses are all located within the sprawling 9-acre historic district. Located right under the iconic Public Market Center sign is one of the most recognizable stalls in the entire market, the Pike Place Fish Co. They have been a Seattle institution since 1930, serving some of the finest, freshest seafood around. But what they're most famous for is their fish throwing skills. These guys can sling a salmon, toss a trout or lob a cod 20 feet without losing a single slippery scale. And I don't know about you, but I feel like fish just tastes better after it's flown through the air multiple times into the hands of a Seattle fishmonger.
Listen up. Better be good. Are you gonna eat this now or later? Yeah, right now. Right now?
Determined not to leave this place empty-handed, Ben asked one of the fishmongers what would be good for us to try right there in the market. We settled on some king crab legs. After it was weighed, they split it open for us and handed it over. We snapped a few quick pics with our crustaceous snack, and then we dug in, and I gotta tell you, after all my years of eating crab legs, I have never had better or fresher. It was a symphony for the taste buds, delicate, salty, and packed full of flavor. My mouth is watering literally just thinking about it. Making our way past the famous fish flingers, we hang a left and find ourselves in a quiet pocket of the market known as the Pike Place Urban Garden. This is a beautiful 2,000 square foot vegetable and herb garden right in the heart of the market. After putting our temporary stamp on the place in chalk, we took a load off and enjoyed a relaxing few minutes in the sunshine. The garden is run entirely by volunteers, and all produce grown is donated to the Pike Market Senior Center and Food Bank. And not only is the garden itself beautiful, the patio provides commanding views of Elliott Bay, where you can catch a glimpse of ships lazily making their way through the water and capture a great view of the Seattle Great Wheel. Next time you're in the market, do yourself a favor. Take a break and find your way to the garden and see what's growing. After the urban garden, we spent about an hour just meandering through the market, drinking in the ambiance and immersing ourselves in the experience. The market is a feast for the senses. Sights, sounds, smells, and tastes culminate in an experience that is unforgettable. We walked through the many food stalls and shops, stopping to enjoy some of the freshest produce one can find anywhere. We strolled past colorful flower vendors, marveling at the rich, colorful hues in the bouquets. We then took a trip down the Lower Post Alley to explore the markets and shops on the lower levels, stopping, of course, to see the famous gum wall, which is a thing for some reason. Back on the surface level, we roamed around some more. Vagabonds with no real plans in place, we soaked up what we could with our short amount of time. Eventually, we made our way further northwest on Pike Place, searching out the original location of what is now the world's largest coffee chain. You know the place. The place where your friend that wears a beret for some reason sits writing his screenplay, sipping on a $7 latte even though he can't afford a second pair of shoes. The place where your favorite fall-infused beverage started its pumpkin infancy. Yes, the one and only Starbucks started right here in Pike Place Market in 1971. Now by this point, the four of us had had enough coffee. We could have made James Bond's favorite drink just standing still. So we didn't opt to go in. But it was very cool just being in the presence of such caffeine greatness. Without a doubt, the most iconic building in Seattle is the Space Needle. Standing 605 feet tall, for 50 years it has been a defining landmark, identifying the Seattle skyline at a mere glance. A 1-minute elevator ride takes you to the top of the spire where the observation deck provides 360-degree views of the city. The Space Needle is in the heart of Seattle Center, an area also home to the Museum of Pop Culture, the Children's Museum, the Chihuly Gardens, and the Pacific Science Center. We decided not to venture to the top of the Space Needle this time because we knew we wanted to visit another landmark with commanding views of the city later in the day, the Smith Tower. But that just means we'll need to come back to Seattle and visit the top next time. Venturing back across the city, we make our way to Pioneer Square, a neighborhood that marks the birthplace of Seattle, settled in 1852. It is here we experienced one of the most interesting and unusual attractions in Seattle, Bill Speidel's Underground Tour. After a brief introduction to the town's history from our tour guides, we were led down below street level to a series of interconnected tunnels that mark the original ground floor of the city. In 1889, the Great Seattle Fire burned down the entire town. A veritable tinderbox made entirely of wood, it was leveled in a span of about 24 hours. Luckily, the town's economy was doing well and things were quickly rebuilt, 1 to 2 stories above where the town's original streets once stood. For a time, the lower street level remained open with the actual street paved 1 floor above the shop's entrances. However, there were no sidewalks on either side of the road, which meant that if one wanted to cross the street, they would have to climb a ladder, walk across the street, and descend another ladder. Once sidewalks were finally in place, most merchants moved their businesses up to the new ground level on the 2nd floor. Some businesses, however, continued for a time to use the lower, now underground storefronts. Skylights were added to the sidewalk above to provide light to the tunnels below. While over time the tunnels began to deteriorate and were largely deserted, of course, as one would expect, they found a new life during Prohibition. Almost as if they were built to run bootleg hooch and hide speakeasies, these tunnels were aflurry with activity in the 1920s. Then they largely went abandoned again until 1965, when Bill Speidel began taking intrigued tourists down to explore. Most of the tunnels are still closed, but a small portion has been made accessible for the public, giving anyone with a love of history a chance to step back in time, to visit a city entombed, a time capsule waiting to be discovered once again. To cap off our jam-packed day in Seattle, we sauntered to the Smith Tower, just down the road in Pioneer Square. At one time the highest building west of the Mississippi River, Seattle's original skyscraper feels like it's ripped directly from the 1920s. We have made it to the 35th floor of the Smith Tower. What a way to end an absolutely incredible day in one of the greatest cities in America, Seattle. Friends, craft cocktails, and tasty bites all served with a view. dropping off our bags and quickly getting through the check-in process, we were ready to board the ship. Waving goodbye to Seattle, we stepped on board our floating home for the next week. Our ship for this Alaskan voyage is the Norwegian Bliss, one of the newest ships in the Norwegian fleet. Elegantly decorated while still warm and inviting, the Bliss is one of the finest ships sailing the seas today. It's also the first ship that was built specifically to take in the spectacular vistas of an Alaskan cruise. With many areas of the ship featuring massive floor-to-ceiling windows and plenty of outdoor spaces on deck, it was designed to give you a deeper connection to nature. This 170,000-ton behemoth has everything. And I mean everything. Theaters and entertainment areas, restaurants, bars, clubs, pools and hot tubs, adults-only areas, kids-only areas, a casino, a spa, an ice cream shop, a laser tag arena, and an onboard go-kart track. In short, if the Norwegian Bliss doesn't have it, you probably don't need it. Today's modern ships truly are like floating cities. It's like checking into a resort and waking up in a new city every day. And one of the best parts about cruising is that you can do as much or as little as you like. Want to relax in a hot tub, enjoy the spa, or curl up with a good book on deck watching the awe-inspiring views of Alaska drift by? You can do that. Want to race go-karts or take a terrifying drop over the side of the ship on one of the water slides? Well, you can do that too. You get all of this while exploring incredible destinations worldwide, and you only have to unpack once. Getting to visit extraordinary places like Alaska during the day, all while having wonderful entertainment and dining on board in the evening, is a pretty sublime way to spend a week. An Alaskan cruise is one of the most awe-inspiring travel journeys one can ever hope to experience. In the southeast region of the state lies Alaska's Panhandle, consisting of a narrow strip of land along the western coast of Canada and hundreds of islands jutting into the Pacific Ocean. This remote area has only 3 cities that are connected to the main continent by road. Therefore, if you want to visit the spectacular towns nestled within verdant rainforests along this narrow stretch of water, mountains, and rugged wilderness, you can only get there by air or by water. That's why cruising is the most ideal way of seeing this area of Alaska. The scenic waterway between the islands and the mainland is known as the Inside Passage, a relatively calm route through protected waters that stay tranquil and provide cruise ships with amazing views. Once off the ship, you'll find organized chaos. In all the commotion, you'll see tour operators with large signs trying to wrangle in their groups for the day, while buses hiss and sputter and tourists wander around with very confused looks on their faces. Most official shore excursions meet on the ship, so if you follow your group closely, you shouldn't have any issues. I nearly always recommend booking shore excursions with your actual cruise line. While official shore excursions are almost always more expensive than the ones you may find locally, they do offer a few benefits for the price. Tour operators will be well vetted and insured, and most importantly, they will be in contact with your ship if they're running late. If you're off on your own or with a different tour, the ship could leave without you. In Juneau, 2 of the most popular shore excursions are dog sledding on top of a glacier. Yeah, you heard me right. And this, the Mount Roberts Tramway. Cruise ships dock right by the tramway, which takes passengers on a 6-minute ride up a steep incline 1,800 feet of the nearly 4,000-foot mountain for a panoramic view of the town. For our time in Juneau, we've opted instead for another popular excursion, a trip to Alaska's most accessible glacier, Mendenhall Glacier. We're doing so via a bike and brew tour. It begins with a bike ride around some of the more off-the-beaten-path areas of Juneau, then we have 2 stops at Mendenhall Glacier, and we end with a local beer tasting. Back at the port, we're loaded onto a bus and shuttled away, while our tour guides give us an overview of Alaska's second city. After gearing up and getting a quick safety speech, we're off. We ride our bikes past neighborhoods, down winding streets, mountains in the distance at nearly every turn.
Western hemlock. And so different ways to tell them apart is by the bark. The thicker spruce is small and circular pieces of bark, and the western hemlock is longer strips of bark. But if you're looking from far away, if you look at the tops of these trees behind you, you see some kind of fold their head over, or they droop. The one that folds its head over is the western hemlock. It's probably our Alaskan state tree. So this one's our Alaskan state tree right here. The western hemlock folds its head over in shame.
This is so cool. This is one of the coolest things we've ever done. Highly recommend. We make our way to the first of 2 stops at Mendenhall Glacier, enjoying a laid-back pace as we go. Once there, we dismount and round the corner, ready for our first up-close views of the Juneau ice field and the colossal natural wonder. A sight that could render even the most verbose among us speechless. Although glaciers are abundant in southeast Alaska, only a few are as accessible as Mendenhall Glacier. Mendenhall Glacier is located about 12 miles outside of Juneau, and it is only one small fraction of the Juneau ice field, a 1,500 square mile expanse of snow and ice that's home to about 40 other large glaciers. Standing back and trying to drink it all in, you realize that there are few places on Earth as astounding and overwhelming. Guests can almost walk right up to the glacier from the visitor center and get up close and personal with this frozen wonder. One marvels at the staggering shades of blue on display while huge chunks of ice calve into the small lake. Due to climate change, like many other glaciers throughout the world, Mendenhall is retreating at an accelerated and potentially irrevocable pace. Only 15 years ago, Mendenhall extended out into this water, and now it only takes up a small chunk of real estate along the edge. It compels us to consider the connectedness of nature and humans. Alaska is home to nearly 100,000 glaciers, and there are several ways of getting a more in-depth education. Helicopters and seaplanes are a popular way to get a bird's eye view of the ice fields, further helping us realize the vast scale of this imposing type of environment. In many places, these aircraft will actually land into a guided walking glacier trek. Not only are glaciers entire ecosystems in their own right, they also contribute vast volumes of fresh water to both land and marine environments. By grinding down mountains into fine particles, glaciers provide our oceans with a variety of vital nutrients including nitrogen, phosphorus, and carbon, all of which contribute to the marine food chain. A great place to learn more about glaciers and their effect on our lives is by heading to the Mendenhall Glacier Visitor Center. Here you can take in some spectacular views of the river of ice and learn more about it with enriching exhibits and a 15-minute movie called Landscape of Change. There are hands-on experiences for all ages, interactive exhibits, and a bookstore. Here you can learn more about why glaciers are so incredibly important and why we need to protect them, not just for their own sake, and not just for the sake of those animals that call this type of ecosystem home, but for the entire planet's well-being. No matter how you spend the rest of your time in Juneau, be sure to carve out some time to explore Mendenhall Glacier. All right, so now we are about to the brew portion of our bike and brew, and it's a beer tasting. I don't know what all that's going to include, but hey. So we're trying 3 different beers here. We're trying the Alaskan, they're all Alaskans, the summer Kolsch style, the amber, and the free-ride.
This I like.
The Kolsch, you like? Good?
Ben says it tastes like pennies.
No, I said this one doesn't that much, but this style, sometimes I don't like because it tastes like pennies. This one's not bad. Yeah.
The Alaskan Hotel and Bar is the oldest operating hotel in Alaska, dating back to 1913, when it was built by 4 men in less than 6 months' time during Alaska's gold rush. Rated one of the best bars in America by Esquire magazine, after a major renovation in the late 70s, it has been lovingly restored to its 1913 glory and appears practically unchanged from 100 years ago. After the Alaskan Hotel, we make our way to another famous Juneau institution, the Red Dog Saloon. Arguably the most famous bar in Alaska, this watering hole opened in 1890. During the summer months, the Red Dog Saloon is so popular that you often have to wait in a queue just to get in. Once inside, nearly every surface is cluttered and covered in stuff. A thick layer of sawdust coats the floor, graffiti, dollar bills, business card, taxidermied animals, and even a pistol that once belonged to Wyatt Earp all clamor for space, hanging on every inch of wall. Is it just me, or is there something about saloon doors that just make you feel like an outlaw when you bust through them? The further north you go, the bigger the mountains that reach into the sky. Overnight, we've made our way from Juneau to the northernmost place on our journey, Skagway. Today we booked a double excursion, a trip on the White Pass Railway, and a wilderness hike up to the Lawton Glacier. When you sign up for a shore excursion through the cruise line, you'll be given a ticket. That ticket has a lot of information, including where your tour is meeting, the meeting time, the date, and important information about your chosen excursion, such as passport requirements and physical constraints. Today, we're meeting in the Bliss Theater as indicated on our ticket. Generally, you'll meet somewhere on the ship and disembark as a group. They will call your excursion, and you'll head out.
6411 Cushel Wildlife Refuge. You also have to go all the way at the end of the pier, right after the tunnel.
Of course, if you're not doing a shore excursion through the cruise line, you're free to disembark as you please. From our cruise ship terminal, we board a bus and are taken to the White Pass Railroad for the first part of our journey deep into Alaska's wilderness. One of the most difficult aspects of traveling on an Alaskan cruise is deciding what to pack, since weather can run the gamut from warm and sunny to freezing snow and rain. This hike was particularly hard to pack for, but luckily, Packer Expeditions, the operator of our tour, provided us with everything we needed: waterproof clothing, hiking gear, and even food. So we were free to set out on our voyage in search of nothing but excitement and discovery. While today the White Pass and Yukon route operates merely as a tourist attraction, the story of this railroad is the story of gold. In July 1897, miners arrived in Seattle with tons of it. The news electrified the nation, and within weeks, tens of thousands of men and women steamed north towards Skagway. There they would begin their harrowing 600-mile journey to the Klondike goldfields. Construction of this 110-mile narrow-gauge railroad began in 1898 to make the journey through White Pass easier. Nowadays, it's more of a leisure experience than a practical one, and we were simply enjoying the spectacular views. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, in the middle of this vast expanse of wilderness and mountains, our merry little cohort of hikers were told to get off the train. To say we were a bit trepidatious about what we had gotten ourselves into would be an understatement. But once we were geared up and on the trail, the fresh forest air deep in our lungs, we knew this was going to be an experience we would never forget. Once we were about halfway up the mountain, we found a flat spot and stopped for a lunch break. We were then supposed to turn around and begin our trek back, but Ben, ever the explorer, persuaded a few of the guides to take a small group of us further up the mountain. So while some of us turned around and headed back after lunch, a few of the more adventurous explorers continued on up the face of the mountain to get a closer look at the awe-inspiring glacier. The terrain became more treacherous, more rugged, and steeper, but the views it afforded were well worth the effort.
There was some running water. They had to help us over the running water back there. You can see like they're like, all right, so you step and then one big step across the water. All right, and we're carrying on. I will say though that because we dressed well, I'm not all that cold.
No.
I really feel pretty good.
It looks like we would be, but it's not that.
Yeah, it looks like, yeah, but it's not bad. Knock on wood.
I can't remember what temperature it actually is there.
Yeah, I don't know. We're almost at the top. You can see the glacier up there.
Yeah, we
That's
just like
so cool.
caught sight.
The phrase breathtaking views is far overused by travel writers. Everything from the rolling hills of Ireland to a highway overpass in Toledo seems to offer breathtaking views. However, in this instance, I can assure you, there is no better phrase to encapsulate the views we found on this hike. And did I mention it was a 7-mile hike that took several hours? That means not only was it breathtaking, but it was indeed breathtaking.
Kind of got off the trail there because we had some more time. So they said we're ahead of schedule, so we're coming over here on these rocks. And we are going right over to where the glacier, so the glacier that we were just at is way up there. And this is all the runoff from the glacier. She said you can go feel like the glacial silt. So it's like really finely milled sand.
I feel so cool.
Yeah, we're gonna go see. She said it's, you could try some back there, but she said it's even better up here. So we're kind of working our way over here to where the river is. So they were saying it's scattered in a few different places in the national forest here. They've got these little cabins, and you can rent them out for like $35 a night, and then the Forest Service will come out and open them and all that. But it's just bare bones. You know, there's really not much to it, but it's got a little bench and a little fireplace there, and that would be your view. I just think that's so cool. Be out here in the middle of the woods, middle of the forest, have your own little place.
The Tongass National Forest is the largest national forest in the country, covering over 17 million acres. Scattered throughout this temperate rainforest, you'll find dozens of cabins just like this one, perfect for campers and backpackers to provide some shelter from the elements. The accommodations vary depending on the cabin, but they all come with a few things in common: spectacular views, fresh air, and a chance to escape the hustle and bustle of modern life. even if just for a little while. Well, as the song says, she'll be coming around the mountain when she comes. The train rounded the corner and we loaded up and headed back to Skagway.
This is cool. We're in the caboose. So cool.
Pretty neat caboose.
I think all this is like blocked by clouds.
Yeah, we couldn't hardly see any of this.
Of all the things we did in Alaska on this trip, this was my favorite. Nothing I show you here can begin to compare to being there. Everyone should experience this kind of hike at least once in their life. After our 7-mile mountain trek, we felt we deserved an ice-cold beer, so we stopped at a few breweries as we headed back to our ship. In its day, Skagway was a scrappy little town. Today, it's an amazingly preserved artifact from North America's biggest and most storied gold rush. While many of the buildings are recreations nowadays, Skagway is still one of the most authentic gold rush towns around. Ooh, is that another place for a beer? Before you even arrive, you sense it. A change in the air. You begin in the modern age at the inlet, floating by new, lush forests. But as you venture further into the bay, you travel back in time, back to the Ice Age. As the ship slowly carves its way through icy water, you get the feeling that you are Jack, climbing the beanstalk into the land of giants. Aquamarine waters are filled with icebergs the size of a small car. They lazily float by, watching you as you drift into their domain. The exploration of glaciers in Alaska is one of the greatest travel experiences in North America, and nowhere allows you to do that better than here. This is a World Heritage Site, an immersive natural lab, a United Nations Biosphere Reserve, a national park, and most importantly, a spiritual homeland for the Tlingit natives. Here you'll find countless species of plants and wildlife, placid and serene waters, soaring mountains, and earth-shaping rivers of ice. This is Glacier Bay National Park. Overnight, we've sailed from Skagway to Glacier Bay National Park. Early in the morning, we dressed and headed to the bow of the ship to get some of our first views of the glaciers. Glacier Bay isn't like other ports in the fact that it's not really a port at all. Cruise ships generally spend 8 to 10 hours in Glacier Bay sailing around the serene waters, but you don't disembark. Ships will get close to the glaciers for observation by passengers from the deck, but you'll remain on the ship all day. If each port in Alaska is a show, Glacier Bay is the most exclusive ticket in town. Only 2 large ships are allowed in Glacier Bay each day, and competition between cruise lines for entry into the park is intense. So, make sure your itinerary has you going to Glacier Bay. As you get closer, flocks of guests rush to get a front row seat. From far off, it's hard to tell the immense scale of these mountains of ice, but as you get closer, you begin to understand their awesome, powerful size. Everyone clamors to get a selfie in front of the glacier because, as the age-old question goes, if a glacier calves into the water and no one is around to take a selfie in front of it, did it even happen? The first glacier we see is Marjorie Glacier, which is a tidewater glacier in the western arm of Glacier Bay. Just over 250 years ago, Glacier Bay was all glacier and no bay. Back then, a massive river of ice, roughly 100 miles long and thousands of feet deep, occupied the entire bay. Today, that massive glacier is gone, leaving behind fewer than a dozen tidewater glaciers. Ships must travel 65 miles into the long finger-like inlets before they can see the ones left behind, sequestered into their own alcoves. They flow from the mountains to calve into the sea, inviting us to slow down and breathe deeply the cool of the Ice Age air. These mammoth glaciers stand as sentinels, ever changing their faces, observers to the passage of time as they retreat into the distance. While in Glacier Bay, there are several places on the ship to find some incredible views. We head back out to the lower decks, but we could have just as easily have found spectacular views on the top deck from the balcony in our staterooms, which I highly recommend for an Alaskan cruise, or from the observation lounge on the 15th floor, one of the highlights of sailing to Alaska on the Norwegian Bliss. We spent most of our day in Glacier Bay outside on the lower decks because the weather was comfortable and there was plenty of seating. The ship provided binoculars, but I definitely recommend bringing your own as well, just in case there's a line. Although there are over 1,000 glaciers in Glacier Bay, you'll likely only see 4 to 5 tidewater glaciers. Some of the most frequently viewed are the Marjorie, Reed, and Johns Hopkins glaciers. Ships generally linger in front of each glacier to give guests plenty of time to admire their incredible beauty. While glaciers are obviously the star of the show in Glacier Bay, there's so much more to see here. As the glaciers have retreated, young new forests now cloak parts of the land in incredible, rich green hues. The biodiversity here is a dream for naturalists and scientists. Flora and fauna are abundant, and while we visitors appreciate them for their aesthetic beauty, there are a lot of specialists who study here. We've learned a lot from Glacier Bay about animals and plant life, and a lot about climate change. Here in Glacier Bay, some glaciers are retreating and some are advancing, but overall, the accelerated melting of ice in modern times is a dramatic and persistent reminder of large, potentially disruptive shifts underway from our warming climate. Being in such close proximity to Alaska's melting glaciers helps us form that personal connection to climate change. While we are lucky enough to enjoy these beautiful mountains of ice, it's important to think about the future and ask ourselves how Glacier Bay may change even in our own lifetime. We need to ask ourselves what we can do to help preserve this breathtaking environment for future generations of humans and animals. It entices us to take a moment in which we do nothing but focus on what could be the waning years of glaciers as we know them. Glacier Bay is a great place to see a ton of wildlife, provided you're not me. Seriously, I kept missing everything this entire trip. My travel companions would see, say, a giant brown bear foraging for food, and I would turn around to see it just for a split second as we rounded the corner, just catching a glimpse before it disappeared from view. In Glacier Bay, you can find seals, whales, bears, otters, eagles, and so much more. So keep your eyes peeled, your binoculars ready, and don't be me. To enhance our experience while in Glacier Bay, National Park Rangers board the ship early in the morning to answer questions, give announcements, and provide insight and perspective into what we're seeing with commentary throughout the day.
The snow becomes very compact and dense, eventually turning it into solid ice.
They wander around the ship and teach classes in the main theater throughout the day, lecturing about the park and the environment. They talk about what it's like to live in Glacier Bay and what to look for while you're here. Then, at the end of the day, they disembark, climb back into their own boat, and sail off into the sunset like superheroes. Overnight, we've sailed through calm Alaskan waters from Glacier Bay National Park to Ketchikan. Upon waking, we step outside into the early morning sun to see that we have a spectacular bird's eye view of the downtown area right from our stateroom balcony. Ketchikan is visually striking. Speckled throughout its lush green backdrop are vivid dots of color, scattered throughout the town like brightly colored children's building blocks. Boats of all shapes and sizes putter their way through the harbor while we stand several stories above, breathing deep the fresh, salty air, looking down on the scene as if we've just stepped into a live movie set. But Ketchikan is far from a facade. This is a town with stories to tell. It has an incredibly rich Alaskan native culture with thousands of years of history, and in more recent times, at the turn of the last century, it was a boom town. During Prohibition, its red light district was home to many speakeasies and more than 30 brothels. Today, however, we're looking past the city and its history and delving into nature on a sea kayak adventure.
There's a bald eagle up there in front of that tree.
Oh my god. The bus driver just pointed it out.
That is so cool.
We're picked up right from the dock and taken by shuttle to our shore excursion. Ketchikan has so much to offer. This is home to the famous Creek Street, a historic area of Ketchikan where you can walk along a boardwalk and see houses supported by stilts. It's also home to the Saxman Totem Park and the famous Great Alaskan Lumberjack Show, all things we're going to have to hit up next time we're in town. This time around, we're headed out of town to explore the great outdoors. We are driven to the headquarters of Southeast Exposure, the operator of our tour. Once we're there, we gear up and are taken by boat to Tatoosh Island, a small island northwest of downtown. Once there, we'll slide into our kayaks and discover unparalleled coastline, crystal clear waters, and all kinds of wildlife. We're lucky because we're here on a beautiful, clear, sunny day. Ketchikan is notorious as one of the rainiest places in the world. On average, it receives 140 to 160 inches of rainfall annually, so be sure to bring your rain gear. Sometimes when we travel, it's hard to put into perspective how extraordinary it really is. I specifically remember standing in this lush green forest and thinking to myself how lucky I was to be in Ketchikan, in Alaska, with friends, exploring places I never thought I'd be able to see in my lifetime. I think it's so important to take a moment like this every time we travel. Take a deep breath and experience entirely where you are. Envision yourself on a map. Try to give yourself some perspective and have a quiet moment of reflection. Think about your place in the world. Those of us that are able to travel are indeed the luckiest people in the world. And it's important to understand how truly fortunate we are. It's the final day on our Alaskan cruise, and today we're stopping in Victoria, British Columbia. I woke up early to try and soak in the last of our mountain views, and fog gave the entire scene a haunting aura. Due to an old maritime law from 1886, almost all Alaskan cruises have to stop in a foreign port. The good news is, many cruises stop in the beautiful city of Victoria. The bad news is, they only give you like 3 hours, but we were determined to make the most of it. We walked into the downtown area known as the Inner Harbor and simply strolled around. We stopped in at the Fairmont Empress Hotel, originally opened in 1902 by the Canadian Pacific Railway. It's a grand chateau-style hotel that you find in many Canadian cities. The hotel provides a spectacular view of the Inner Harbor, and so we decided to hop inside for a drink and some appetizers. From there, we only had a little bit of time to explore the immediate area, stop in one more bar, and then it was time to go back to the ship, and overnight, we made our way back to Seattle to end our incredible Alaskan journey. In the course of our lives, we can only hope to have a few travel experiences so immersive, so awe-inspiring, and so life-changing. It's not very often that we can travel and enjoy such a wide array of experiences. Captivating cities, breathtaking adventures, indulgent cuisine, spellbinding history, wonderful entertainment, and rugged, unspoiled nature, all made better when sharing it with friends. Alaska provides an endless display of natural beauty, This is truly one of the greatest travel experiences one can have in North America, and indeed, the world. This is the Great American Cruise. This is Alaska.